How's it going, folks? Stu here. If you've been following my videos or socials for like however long, I'm sure I don't need to spell it out for you guys, but you know, I haven't really been loving a lot of Marvel stuff as of late. Phase 4 was, how do I put this? Shit. Marvel really did take a Calvin Klein sponsorship there, in that it was pants all the way through. Oh, God. I haven't done a full review for a Marvel film since like 2 years ago with Black Widow, which feels like an eternity ago. We've had a butt ton of projects since then, none of which particularly interested me wholly enough to sit and talk about for you guys. But if there was one saving grace that could come along and maybe get me back into the Marvel party that everyone still seems to be just, I'm sure it would have been someone like Mr. James Gunn. And I'm happy to say that on the whole, my guy did it. He pulled me a little bit back in. Mr. Gunn, ladies and gentlemen. So, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Don't need to explain. The third Guardians of the Galaxy film. Not sure there's much point explaining where we're at with Guardians of the Galaxy at this point. If you're not, you know, into the storyline, then I can't imagine why you're here. What are you doing? A lot of things have happened to the Guardians of the Galaxy during the old MCU journey. And this one basically finds them after all that other stuff that happened. I'll be honest, I sort of fell so out of love with Marvel, I'm not entirely sure where they were at character-wise at the start of this film. So that's the best you're getting from me here. But there's a new bad guy who's doing some stuff to them, and they have to team up and take him down. This was an immediately, just, I guess, kind of refreshing turn for Marvel in the landscape of Marvel at the moment, in so much as it was just nice to see a director and a film in the big Marvel machine that felt like it was confidently able to do and convey what it was trying to do, which sounds like an incredibly surface level and simple thing to have to get right. But honestly, one of the biggest things that's put me off Marvel recently, and that I just get annoyed about whenever I sit down and watch a Marvel film, is just the sheer volume of things happening that I just don't really care about, because it feels like it's all in service of itself, or the fact that it all needs to work in this big universe of things happening and new information and new characters. It was good to see James Gunn it up, is what I'm saying. And I did enjoy what he brought to the table here in terms of delivering a finale to the overall Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. This one centers much more on Rocket, I guess, and he's grounded much more as the glue that holds everything together. I liked that overall. I think it was a good move, and it does add, you know, a natural evolution to the three films we've had already. The characters have kind of evolved in who's the big players and who's the central characters, and the ensemble as a whole has evolved in a way which I think really, really works and is really, really entertaining. I'm not convinced that the way that it weaves all of the Rocket stuff back into the mix was as wholly satisfying as I wanted it to be. It's got a very strange way of just kind of throwing flashbacks at you and hoping that those land and then just get you hooked on Rocket's backstory. And I'll be honest, the flashbacks that we get are kind of samey in the... Yeah, Rocket had some cute friends and he was abused as an animal. It's not fun. It's kind of dark. It's refreshingly dark, I think, for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is a good thing. But as far as where those flashbacks go, they all sort of take place in the same place. They all pretty much signify and do the same thing. It does feel a little bit like it's hammering home the same thing over and over in a flashback form, which wasn't particularly satisfying or engaging as an audience member. But what it does do is eventually weave in enough of Rocket's backstory to make you care in a different way about him. And it's definitely good to have someone like James Gunn who has a really strong grasp on character and how to weave character beats into a big overall fun, goofy sci-fi action set piece film. He's very good at landing things even when the film isn't particularly great at setting those things up. And I think that's what kind of made for, I guess, a frustrating watch overall for me. The first half definitely felt like it was just kind of scrambling to get pieces back together to be able to set up the end of this film. It throws us into the world of the Guardians again in a way which just feels a little bit kind of startling. What it kind of felt like to me was a kind of writing, directing equivalent of a mad rush to leave the house when you're already late for something you know you need to get to. Just grabbing the keys, grabbing your phone and wallet, everything you need to get, your coat, slinging it on and getting out the door. And I think the first half of the film particularly, for me, felt a lot like trying to get past the things that it already messed up in that opening, in that first act. And that's not to say that the film doesn't have a lot of the things we've come to really love about James Gunn's Guardians films in there. It's a great looking film, especially in the context of a lot of the Marvel films we've seen as of late. The set design, the character design, the look of this stuff, the CGI, the way the effects all work together, and the way that it always has this kind of playful, creative touch to the scenes, to the environments, is still great, and it hasn't lost any of that from the previous 2 installments. But there are a lot of casualties in the first act in terms of a satisfying character and thematic arc for this film on its own. One of those is the Gamora-Pete relationship, which just felt entirely flat for me and just felt like it had so much potential that never really got touched on. There's a whole bunch of stuff with the new character, Adam Warlock, who I'm not a comic reader. I don't really have an attachment to that character before. I like Will Poulter as a performer, but everything that was going on with that in this film just felt like a complete halt of things. Any energy, any momentum that came every time he was on screen, I just couldn't be fucked with it. And perhaps the biggest casualty of such a messy, scrappy first act is that I found this time around a lot of the humor and comedy that come from the silly shit that the Guardians are saying to each other and all their different personalities clashing in the group in that kind of bickering family dynamic. I found a lot of that to feel, how do I put it, more cringe than before. I don't know whether that's just having seen so much of that type of comedy in the Marvel Cinematic Universe at this point, having seen so much of that in 2 Guardians films at this point. It feels like that very kind of eccentric, idiosyncratic personality that stood aside from everything else in the cinematic universe here is starting to feel formulaic in its own right. There are many different things in the MCU that are just kind of cookie cutter tick box by the number things at this point. I don't need to name them. It's not that those things overall are a huge part of this film, although they do creep into the mix. It's more that the things the Guardians films were doing separately to that are themselves becoming cookie cutter tick box by the number exercises. Things like the soundtrack and the needle drops and the bickering and the way they all interact is starting to feel like the same shit we saw in the previous 2. It's starting to get a little bit tiresome for me. But, and there's a huge but here, despite the messes of the first act of this film, the first 2 acts of this film, but despite the things that I really didn't like about a lot of this film, somehow James Gunn is able to still get us to where we need to get for the end of the film. And actually the last half hour of this thing, the final act, was really great, like surprisingly great for a Marvel film at this point. I've become so used to the end climactic act of a Marvel film just becoming the same nonsense shit. And it was really nice to see a Marvel film pull all of its themes and threads together in a really satisfying way, which was just also supremely fun. It was a really great final act, I have to say. The action ramps up in a really satisfying way. There's a fantastic hallway fight scene, which I know has sort of become a bit of a get out of jail free card in films, but when they're done well, it's worth shouting about. And the hallway one shot in this film is done so well. It was fantastic. But where the characters end up getting to feels earned, even though the way we got there, for my money, felt a bit shoddy and a bit all over the place. I almost wish it hadn't had such a great final act, because then this review might have felt a little bit more coherent and I might have been more easily able to just be like, no, that was bad, didn't like it. James Gunn is just, he's got a great way of landing things emotionally and of connecting dots, I think, thematically. There is definitely a point in the film where I think those things take a turn for the better. I don't want to spoil things, but there's a kind of a big moment in the film where it definitely shifts gears, and I think if you've seen the film you should hopefully know what I'm referring to. But that gear change just shifted things in a really positive way, and I really liked the way that it all came together. It was a lot of fun. It had a lot of messy stuff in there. It was a rocky road to get to where it needed to get to, but when it got there, it was a really solid, fun time. A good entry to the trilogy, a good way to end it. Probably my least favorite Guardians film. But what about you guys? Have you seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? If you have, let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. Let me know where it ranks for you in the overall Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. And I guess in the overall MCU, if you want to do that. I don't know how many films there have been at this point, but that'd be a long list. So I almost don't want you to fill my comment section with that. Don't do it. Whatever you thought about the film though, let me know in the comments down below. We'll have a little chat. And of course, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see me talk about more shit, go ahead and click subscribe. The button is down there. I'll see you guys very soon for some more thoughts on more films. But until next time, I'm gonna go rock the soundtrack from this film for a bit. Some bangers in there. Some bangers.